Hello and welcome to the 99th episode of The Literary Lair. If you've been watching my show since before the 50th episode, you'd know that I have a bit of an issue with a little Star Trek book called Before Dishonor.
No, I can't take this anymore. You know what? Review over. This book sucks. And others, eggs like fruit. That was Before Dishonor. And boy, did it suck. The book was terrible, the story was insipid, the plot twist stunk, and overall, it was worse than Backwards. The worst book that I have ever read in my life. God damn it! And all in all, this book takes the award for the worst book I've reviewed on this show so far. Next week, I'll do something a little different, but it sure as hell won't be as bad as this.
And 4 years that I spent reading true Trek, like Before Dishonor. Before Dishonor, which I needed 2 videos to explain how bad it sucked. I might have mentioned it a few times. Anyway, that book is still, about 70 reviews later, the worst excuse for a Star Trek book, or literature in general, that I have ever had the pleasure of tearing apart. But I actually really like the author. Peter David wrote a bunch of other Star Trek books, and 2 of them are even my favorites, The Rift and Q Squared. Now, I read those prior to reading Before Dishonor, and that book's terribleness in no way diminished my love for those books. But what about a book I haven't read before? I want to see if Before Dishonor ruined my perceptions of Peter David's writing, even writings that were made prior to Before Dishonor. That's why, in the last review, before the 100th episode, I want to give Peter David a chance to be redeemed. Today we're going to look at another one of his Star Trek books, Imzadi. And according to the cover, it was a New York Times bestseller. So let's hope it's as good as it seems. Let's not waste any more time and take a look at Imzadi. The cover is leagues ahead of Before Dishonor, whereas that was a boring, semi-transparent blue Jerry Ryan in front of a blue board cube on a dark blue backdrop. Imzadi is a breath of fresh air. We've got a similar blue color used to much better effect here. We've got the Star Trek logo and the title smack dab in the center, with the Guardian of Forever and a person standing in it above the title, and 2 Riker standing next to Deanna Troi. One Riker is young, somewhere around the age that Riker was when he got duplicated by the transporter, and the other is an older Riker, likely around the age of Admiral Riker in the finale of TNG, All Good Things. And it looks like there's a special offer for the sequel inside. I wonder if that's still valid. This is an amazing cover, and I am very confident about the book's content. Let's get to the story. The story opens up with an old guy standing in front of the Guardian of Forever as the man's crew stands beside him, waiting for him to finish his business with the Guardian, and when he does, they leave, but they're being watched by Commodore Data. Data is standing with Mary Mack, an Orion scientist who intentionally dresses down so that she isn't objectified by people, which, as the book explains, is only a problem for Orion females, because they're still seen as, and I quote, animalistic sex kittens. What the hell? So, the Star Trek future is free of any and all prejudice, unless you're green.
That's really offensive. No wonder everyone keeps invading you.
5 pages in, and this is not looking good. Data and Mary talk about the Guardian, with Mary bringing up Kirk's adventure with it, before Data asks her, as she's the head of the base, to touch it, as they are the rarities of the universe. Both Data and the Guardian are one of a kind. Except that there's more of the Sung androids out there. There's Lair, B4, Sung's wife, but I'll give it a pass, as except for Lair, the other Sung androids hadn't appeared yet, and I'm pretty sure Lair is presumed dead at this point. They converse with the Guardian, but he only says his standard phrases, and Data touches him as Mary asks about the Enterprise F, and Data says that it's very similar to the Enterprise D. Now we switch perspectives to the aging commander of Starbase 86, which is in the crappy part of space, and Lieutenant Dexter goes to deliver a message to Admiral William T. Riker. It seems that Laxwana Troi is dying, and she requested his presence. Riker says that there's no way to get a ship in time, but Starfleet has already arranged for Riker to be picked up by the USS Hood, captained by former acting ensign, now Captain, Wesley Crusher. Wesley takes him to Beta Z, and Riker goes to meet with Laxwana, who is furious at him because he failed to save Deanna many years ago. She tries to kill him, saying that he could have saved Deanna, and then passes away. Riker attends her funeral, seeing an old friend, Wendy Roper, who he met when he was first assigned to Beta Z, and then goes to the Troi family mausoleum to look at Deanna's perfectly preserved body. Wesley shows up and he and Riker get to talking, with Wesley admitting that he had a crush on Deanna. Then he asks Riker what exactly had happened in regards to Deanna's death, as Wesley was at Starfleet Academy when it happened, and Riker tells him the story. During diplomatic negotiations aboard the Enterprise, which are going shockingly well, between a bunch of races and the Sindarine, a warlike race who haven't been quite as lucky as the Klingons, and so are suing for peace with all their enemies. Riker tells Picard that Troi has had some issues with the Sindarine in the past, but he can't reveal what they are because of his modesty. I'd ask, since when has Riker had modesty, but whatever. As they approach the Sindarine's planet, Riker goes to check on Troi, and becomes concerned when she doesn't answer her door, despite being in her quarters. He rings the doorbell frantically, and she answers, revealing that she was busy entertaining an old friend named Dan. And by that, I mean Riker goes to 10 forward to wallow in self-pity, and Guinan tries to console him, but Troi shows up and they agree that they're going to keep themselves as friends, as their first attempt at a relationship apparently ended pretty badly. The diplomatic proceedings get underway, and everything seems to be going well, except that Troi can't quite get a read, because the Sindarine are very hard to emotionally gauge, even with Troi's powers. Later that night, Riker lays in bed when he starts feeling as if Troi is in trouble. He calls Dr. Crusher and they rush to Troi's quarters, where Dan says that she just started to convulse, and he didn't contact anyone because he was panicking and wasn't sure how to contact sickbay. Dr. Crusher does everything she can, but there's not much she can do, and Troi is pronounced dead in sickbay. Riker says that Dr. Crusher blamed herself for Troi's death, but Riker felt that it was his fault. Wesley's combags chirps, and he has to be mad immediately, since there's an emergency and the Hood is the only ship in range. Shocking, because it's usually the Enterprise that gets that honor. Riker goes to organize Laxwana's possessions for either storage or going to a museum, and finds a few items that has him start to reminisce about the first time he met Troi, a poem and a headband. And that's essentially the meat of the book. It's Star Trek's version of How I Met Your Mother. Except it has a much more dignified ending. Seriously, I'm still angry about that. Anyway, Lieutenant William T. Riker is about to leave the USS Fortuna for a small reassignment to Beta Z as a Starfleet liaison, while his next assignment, the USS Hood, where he'll be the first officer, is fixed up after an attack by Sindarine raiders. He is introduced to Mark Roper, the head of the Federation Embassy on Beta Z, who takes a habit of calling him Captain because he's read Riker's file and knows that he's on the fast track to becoming the youngest captain in Starfleet, even beating Kirk's record. Of course, we all know that won't happen, since Riker was still first officer on the Enterprise that year. But why would Riker give up a position on the flagship for some other random ship? I wouldn't accept anything less than the flagship. Riker learns a bit about the Betazoid culture, and then he meets Roper's daughter, Wendy. And because Roper is busy that day, he decides to send Riker in his place to the wedding he had to attend later that night with Wendy. Roper seems amused in sending Riker, as is Wendy, but Riker can't figure out why until he arrives at the wedding. Trek fans will know that the custom at Betazoid weddings is attending naked, so that they can show that there's nothing to hide. Riker shows up in full dress uniform and mingles before the wedding, when everyone starts to strip. Riker is understandably uncomfortable, but does it anyway because it would be a faux pas to do otherwise. While sitting, he spies a woman in the wedding party, the maid of honor, and instantly falls in love with her. However, he doesn't act on anything. They watch the ceremony, and then the Betazoid equivalent of the throwing of the bouquet, which is the throwing of a headband, and the maid of honor catches it, and Wendy says how happy she is that Deanna caught it, as she's a close friend of the bride, Chandra, and Riker spends the rest of the night staring at Miss Deanna Troi. Riker confronts Roper over breakfast about the naked wedding thing, and Roper asks how Wendy was and if he took Wendy to bed with him. Riker is appalled, saying that the way people on Betazed act makes him feel like a prude. Think about that for a minute. William T. Anything that moves Riker feels like a prude. Riker inquires about Deanna and finds out that her mother, Lakswana, is a bit overbearing and one of the strongest telepaths on Betazed. Riker goes to attend to his duties and goes to find Deanna at her university. He tries to impress her and get her to agree to a date, but she'll have none of it, probably because she sensed his horny thoughts back at the wedding. Deanna returns home and finds that Lakswana is sick and unable to attend a ceremony that calls for a daughter of the fifth house, and that Deanna has to fill in for her. Deanna normally wouldn't have a problem with it if the event wasn't being held by the embassy, which means that she'll be forced to interact with Riker. But she sucks it up and agrees to attend anyway. Riker tells Roper about his encounter with Deanna and says that he was nervous about Deanna being able to read his thoughts. But Roper tells him that she's nowhere near the telepath that Lakswana is, since she's half human, and even if she wasn't half human, she still wouldn't be as powerful as her mother. Riker starts shadowing Deanna and confronts her about how she knew stuff about him that he'd assumed she pulled from his thoughts. But as she's an empath, she had to get it from other means, and reveals that she had did her research as well. Deanna agrees to a date and tells Riker when to pick her up the next day for a picnic. Riker gets some dating advice from the security chief, and the next day he goes to pick up Deanna, meeting Mr. Hom for the first time, and then he meets Lakswana, and it does not go well. She reads his mind the whole time, and he's treated like an enemy by her, and Riker and Deanna go on their picnic. They go to eat, and Riker misreads the situation and goes in for the kiss, but Deanna is having none of that. They get into a fight, and Deanna is very disappointed in Riker, since he's only interested in sex, and if she's getting into a relationship, she's interested in getting something more. Riker challenges her to change him, and she agrees. The next day, Riker meets with Roper over breakfast, and as they talk about his attempts with Deanna, they decide to make a bet of 200 credits that Riker won't be able to get with Deanna, and Riker accepts. So that might seem weird, since Star Trek has all been about moneyless society, but you have to remember that Gene Roddenberry didn't decide that until he was making TNG. So there were credits at some point in the Federation, but they were phased out before Next Generation started. Deanna takes Riker to an art museum to try to get him to open his mind, but it doesn't work. So she tries an exercise in the forest where Riker needs to have complete concentration to hold onto a branch, ignoring the pain and only focusing on his mind. But he focuses on Deanna naked, and so he falls off the branch. Deanna, however, had no issue doing it, staying on the branch much longer than Riker did. When she starts climbing down, however, she trips and Riker catches her, and once again, when their faces are close together, he kisses her, but she shouts for him to stop, which he hears in his mind. He suggests that her body wanted him and that she subconsciously fell into his arms, but she says that she tripped on a piece of bark that came loose, and that if Riker looks around, he'll find it, and she walks off. Riker stays behind to find the bark, but he doesn't find it. Riker reads a Betazoid philosophy book that Deanna recommended and realizes that the book is full of stuff that contradicts his natural instincts, as the Betazoid method of problem solving is to just give words of encouragement and not actually solve anything. Riker also checks over the weapons they have in the event of an attack and runs into Wendy again, who is concerned about Riker avoiding him, which he's doing because he's chasing Deanna, despite Wendy being interested in him. Riker goes to meet with Deanna again, but she avoids him. But Riker has started to learn how to project thoughts directly to Deanna, and he knows that she can hear him. That night, Deanna takes Riker out into the forest to do what she claims is a new type of psychologic therapy, which involves getting naked, but not doing the thing that one normally does when naked with a woman, in the name of getting in touch spiritually but not sexually. She talks about how he's obsessed with commanding everything, calling back to the youngest captain since Kirk thing. And they finish up with Riker wanting to do it again sometime. Deanna goes home and is confronted by her mother as to her whereabouts after she snuck out. They have a heart-to-heart about how Laxwana trusts Deanna, but not other people, especially not Riker, and how she has a duty to her lineage. The next day, Riker talks with Gart Zerx, the father of the bride from the wedding, and they talk about Deanna and the newlyweds when a Cinderine ship appears and heads straight for the art museum that Deanna and Zerx's daughter happen to be at that day. The Cinderine start looting the museum, and Chandra uses her telepathy to tell her father what's going on so that Riker can formulate a plan to stop the Cinderine with no casualties. They try their best and destroy nearly all the Cinderine, except for their leader Martyr, who takes Deanna hostage and escapes into the Betazoid jungle when his ship is shot down over it. Riker goes after Deanna alone, and Deanna spends a few days held hostage. Riker tricks Martyr by using some target practice devices to distract him, and Deanna gets the upper hand, but Martyr runs off. Unfortunately for him, he runs straight into a mud pit and refuses help as he sinks to the bottom. Riker and Deanna start to make their way back to civilization, as it's a couple days' walk, and they start to get to know each other better, with Deanna wanting to kiss him, but Riker refuses on the grounds that she's been through trauma and isn't thinking straight. She doesn't care and kisses him, and they, well... Deanna confides in Riker that he was her first, and he is embarrassed that he can't say the same. They try to find a word to describe what they mean to each other, and Deanna decides on Imzadi.
He said it!
Which means both beloved and first in Betazoid, and is indicative of their close relationship. So much so that it becomes the first word that Troy says to Riker in the first episode of The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. Riker writes her a cheesy poem, and they return back to civilization, with Roper wanting to know all the details of their steamy jungle romance, but Riker denies that anything happened, meaning that he loses the bet to Roper, but he's okay with it. Deanna invites Riker to her place, assuming that her mother will be much happier to see Riker this time, seeing as he saved her life, which she is, but she's less happy about their actions afterwards, and forbids Riker from seeing her, because Riker is destroying Deanna's perfectly mapped out life. Deanna decides that it's best if they end their relationship, considering that Riker will eventually leave Betazed when the Hood shows up, so they decide to break it off, and Riker goes to drown his sorrows in booze given to him by the security chief. Wendy shows up, and Riker, being both depressed and drunk, decides to finally get with Wendy. But at the same time, Deanna walks out of her home with Laxwana telling her that if she leaves, she's not allowed back. I'm sure at this point you know what'll happen next. Deanna walks in on Riker and Wendy, and heartbroken returns home to have a heart-to-heart with Laxwana. And Laxwana admits that her mother had arranged a marriage for her, but it didn't work out, and then she met Deanna's father, a human Starfleet officer much like Riker, and her mother and Laxwana had a similar fight. But everything worked out, and Deanna and her mother make up. The Hood finishes faster than anticipated, and Riker is set to ship out, and so he goes to apologize to Deanna and says his goodbye to her. The story then flashes forward to the events of Encounter at Farpoint, where Riker and Picard are talking before Picard introduces Riker to the new ship's counselor, Deanna Troi. They rekindle their friendship, and Admiral Riker finishes remembering as he remembers how their relationship was getting better before her untimely demise. Back on the Enterprise during the peace conference, Riker is sleeping off his synthahol when he is awoken by a strange man appearing in his quarters. The man is Admiral Riker, who tells him that if he doesn't shut up and listen, Deanna Troi will die. On Beta Z, Admiral Riker finishes up his reminiscing and brings some stuff to the Beta Z National Archives before getting picked up by the Enterprise commanded by Data, who offhandedly mentions that his experience with the Guardian has yielded results that there is at least one timeline where Deanna Troi didn't die during the peace conference, and Riker assumes command of the ship and demands that he is taken back to Beta Z. They exhume Deanna's body and perform a second autopsy, discovering that her death was due to a poison that was invented fairly recently, convincing Riker that her death was a mistake and shouldn't have happened. Riker wants to go back and save Deanna, but Data refuses on the grounds that it breaks every regulation in the manual. Riker doesn't care and tries to take command of the ship himself, but is stopped. Riker is returned to Starbase 86 and is left there, but a day later he commandeers the USS Chance and is taken to the Gateway planet. Data chases after him and Riker gets into a fight with Mary Mack right before using the Guardian to leap back in time. So Riker has essentially traveled back in time to put right what once went wrong. I always wondered what Quantum Leap would be like if Sam was played by Jonathan Frakes. He emerges in the holodeck of the Enterprise D and gives Lieutenant Barclay a scare, before heading out to confront himself. The scene from before plays out with Admiral Riker's point of view, and he demands that his past self wake up and go save Troi before it's too late. Commander Riker worries about the Temporal Prime Directive, but Admiral Riker just calls him a clod for not wanting to save Troi. I always thought that Peridot would be the Data in the Star Trek scenario. I want to warn you that the next part gets a little convoluted, so I'll try to keep it simple. Admiral Riker gives Commander Riker the antidote, and Riker rushes to Troi's quarters to give her the antidote to the poison, and she survives. But Dan gets angry and tries to kill Troi. He is stopped, and it's revealed that he's a chameleoid, like Marcia, the shapeshifter from Star Trek VI, and knocked out the real Dan hours ago. It's further revealed that he's an officer from Commodore Data's ship. Speaking of Commodore Data, he shows up and confronts his past self by imitating Picard's voice and incapacitates himself so he can walk around undetected and prepares to kill Troi. Picard keeps Admiral Riker under lock and key for the sake of not contaminating the timeline and prepare to keep the peace conference going as normal. Admiral Riker escapes, however, and finds Data's body and reactivates his head, telling him that the Data he met was actually Lair, and they go off to stop him from hurting Troi. Data confronts Troi, but Riker notices something is amiss when he uses contractions, something Riker has previously experienced a year earlier in Future Imperfect, which had tipped him off that he wasn't talking to the real Data.
You used a contraction, didn't you?
Sir, I can explain if you would just give me a moment.
No, you can't. Don't even try.
Admiral Riker and Data's head burst in to stop it, with Troi realizing that the Sindarine are deceiving them and that one of them is behind the assassination attempt on Troi's life. They stop him, and time begins to resume its normal shape as Commodore Data and Admiral Riker fade out and return to their own time. Riker meets with Troi to talk about the events, and they wrap up their story, with Riker presenting a replica of Chandra's headband from the wedding as they reconcile with each other. The time travelers emerge back in their own time, with the Guardian revealing that the new timeline was in fact the correct one. And as for why it never told them...
You never asked.
The book ends with them getting ready to face the new timeline, and Riker preparing to meet once again with his Imzadi.
There it is! There it is!
And that was Imzadi. Was it better than Before Dishonor? Oh, hell yes! This book is awesome. Not only does it feature my favorite character from the Next Generation, Riker, but it's actually an endearing story. And it uses callbacks in such a way that it makes me want to keep reading and not go watch what they're calling back to. I especially enjoyed the fact that it managed to really get me invested in Riker and Troi's relationship, that they never went into full detail on the show, but this shows that they were really meant for each other. Not only does it manage to do what Before Dishonor failed to do, but it's also taken the spot of one of my favorite books ever. Fun fact, this was written before Riker's middle name was revealed as Thomas, and Peter David gave it as Theolonius, as a reference to Thelonious Monk. But I like this name so much, and the book itself so much, that I actually named my Galaxy Dreadnought in Star Trek Online the USS Thelonious, which is a reference in and of itself, since in the finale of The Next Generation, All Good Things, who commanded a Galaxy Dreadnought but Admiral Riker. This book is amazing. It's one of the best Trek books, nay, one of the best books I have ever looked at on the show. Peter David has been redeemed. Does this mean I'll stop poking fun at Before Dishonor? No, but at least now I'm sure that that was a fluke and that he really is an amazing author. If you like The Next Generation, especially Riker and Troy, go read this book. It's awesome. I highly recommend this book to everyone. And that was Imzadi, and my 99th book review. Next time, it'll be our 100th episode. I can't wait. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button, and if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, share it with your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next time for a book I've wanted to look at for a long time. No, you can't. Don't even try.